Testing.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope everyone's doing well tonight, inshallah. So without further ado, we will be getting started with our amazing program we have tonight. So here are our 4 speakers, and I will be giving a brief introduction of who they are. So first things first, we have Brother Rahman Wood, who is an American Muslim born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. He accepted Islam at the age of 17 and traveled to Mecca, Saudi Arabia to increase his knowledge of Arabic and Islamic sciences. He currently serves as a dedicated board member at the Noor Islamic Cultural Center and is an enthusiastic liaison between the youth department and the board. He praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his many blessings, including his wife and his beautiful children. Please give a round of applause for Brother Rahman Wood. Okay, our second speaker today is Ustad Mustafa Briggs, who is a graduate of Arabic and International Relations from the University of Westminster. Brother Mustafa Briggs started a series called Beyond Bilal, Black History in Islam, and toured 20 universities across the United Kingdom in October 2018, including Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, and SOAS. Mustafa Briggs has appeared on international television and media such as Al Jazeera, the Islamic Channel, to discuss Islamic history, scholarship, and social issues affecting the Muslim community. Again, please give a round of applause for Mustafa Briggs. Our third speaker we have tonight is Ustad Kyle Gray. Kyle Gray is a secondary school religious studies teacher who has a master's degree in history, specializing in history of the Near and Middle East at SOAS. He has made an impact as an interfaith officer serving the University of Leeds Islamic Society and the Committee of Spiritual Dialogue Society at SOAS. Brother Kyle has also ran workshops on Blackness in Islam for the British Council of Muslims and was selected for the Young Muslim Leadership Program, where he connected and worked with influential Muslim politicians, entrepreneurs, and scholars. Again, please give a round of applause for our amazing speaker. And lastly, we have Ustada Zubaydah Ghani. She is an educator from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and gained her foundation of Islamic education at home and in attendance of the First Cleveland Mosque in Cleveland. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and pre-medicine at the Wright State University and became the second youngest graduate of the graduating class in 2004. Sister Zubaydah created an inclusive convert family in Columbus, Ohio, which organizes to foster togetherness in the community. Currently, Sister Zubaydah is working with multiple organizations and groups to help with initiatives, and she still teaches at multiple Islamic centers. So lastly, please give a round of applause for Sister Zubaydah Ghani. So please follow our Facebook page at Beyond Bilal, Education and Empowerment, to look at a deeper depth of the history of our speakers. Also, this program will be live streamed on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, we'll be getting started.
Bismillah. First, we begin with praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sending salutations and blessings upon our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So we've brought this talk here. I'm sorry, I'm a Brit, so some of you may not be able to understand me. I've traveled all the way from London to speak about this topic, something which is important to many of us in London and the wider Muslim community. So my brother Mustafa, next to me, done this tour successfully in the UK, and he titled it Beyond Bilal. And anytime I speak, I never deliver a lecture. I have a conversation with myself and the audience. So I want you to tell me why Mustafa called it Beyond Bilal. You can feel free to shout out or put your hands up. Thanks for the abundance of hands. Anyone? So Bilal's the only one we talk about. Anybody else? MashaAllah. Anyone else? Yep. Pardon? Crossing the boundary of slavery into a choice. So all of the answers you've said are somewhat true, but it's also, anytime Black History Month comes around, we hear of the same figures. We hear of Malcolm X, we hear of Bilal, and if you're lucky, you might hear about Mansa Musa, if you're lucky. But we need to move beyond this rhetoric and narrative of the only three important Black people were these three figures, and look towards a deeper understanding of the contributions people of African descent have made towards Islam. So many of the places of great Islamic knowledge have all been based in Africa. We have places in Fez, in Tunis, in Timbuktu, in all of across West Africa. And these places are not really taught or known about by the wider Muslim community. And the Black figures that you do hear have always been linked to injustice or suffering, nothing ever positive. African history and the African tradition have a rich history of influential Muslim speakers, including female Muslims, which is often ignored as well. So this is why we have entitled the program Beyond Bilal, to move away from that narrative and inshallah guide you to our understanding of the contribution Black people have made towards Islam. It's not all suffering, doom and gloom. Alhamdulillah. So that's the beginning, the intro. First question I would like to ask is, why is Black History Month necessary? And why is this event necessary to the speakers?
Ladies first, inshallah.
For me, Black History Month is important because I feel like, as you said, it's often overlooked or it's often marginalized as far as the information that we're actually given about Black history. Black history is often told from the opinions of non-Blacks, and that changes the entire narrative. So often history is whitewashed and it's told in a sense that is not completely accurate. And what I've learned that in order to actually get a true sense of history, you have to do your own research and use your own intellect to be able to find accurate amounts of historical references, to know what actually happened, the backstories of what happened. And I think if we don't understand what happened in the past, we can't actually move on in the future.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So for me, reflecting upon the concept of Black History Month, even among some African American circles, there's a debate as to whether or not, Black History Month is something that should be continued. There's honestly a debate between some people. There was a famous, a widespread interview where Morgan Freeman was on 60 Minutes. He said, I want to get rid of Black History Month. And the interviewer was shocked, like, what are you talking about? And he's like, why does it have to be just 1 month? Basically saying that the narrative or that concept being that, Black history isn't some separate phenomenon that's outside of the rest of history, right? So I can appreciate that, but at the same time, we find that having a focus point is just human nature, that if you have something to focus on, that you tend to give it more attention, right? So for example, as Muslims, what is the month that the masjid is filled up? The month of Ramadan, right? Now, every Ramadan, that last khutbah, I've given it, some of you guys have given it, we say, brothers, sisters, Allah is the Rabb of Ramadan, but He's also the Rabb outside of Ramadan. Don't go away from the masjid, stay with us the entire year. But there are some people that, despite our efforts, right, Ramadan is it, like that's the focus point. And even for those of us, alhamdulillah, that have been blessed to have a relationship with the masjid, Ramadan increases our focus. There's something in human nature about having a focal point and how that focal point can focus your energy. And so for me, this time of the year it's simply that. It's just a focal point that we can appreciate one facet of the many beautiful facets of our history, which comes, of course, in many shades and many cultures, and we're excited to explore some of that, inshallah ta'ala, in the next couple of days.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So I would say Black History Month for me is extremely important, just for the fact that Black history is very integral to Islam, and Islam is very integral to Black history, and even in ways that we are not aware of. So there's a lot of history that has been, I would say, whitewashed and hidden from the world. Some would say purposefully, some would say not purposefully, but these are kind of hidden aspects of our history and hidden aspects of our heritage that if we were to explore it, it will aid us in further understanding our fellow human beings and further bringing together bonds of unity within the community. Because I do feel that even though we do always preach this thing of there's no fadl over Arab over a non-Arab, and there's no fadl over black over white, within the Muslim community we still suffer from racism, we still suffer from prejudice, we still suffer from, discrimination against darker shades, we still suffer from a lot of ills in our community that the Prophet ﷺ tried to get rid of in his time. And so Black History Month is just another tool that we can use to kind of aid in that mission that Allah states in the Quran of making us tribes and nations in order that we can know each other and discover each other. And I feel like Black history is very important just because of its integrality. Tomorrow we're all going to be giving our presentations and we'll be discussing, and during my presentation, for example, when you look at black prophets mentioned in the Quran and the vital roles that they've played in the foundation of establishing deen in the history of the world, or black Sahaba and the importance they had in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, or even black Muslim scholars and saints over the ages who had a very big impact on the Muslim world and also the non-Muslim world, then you can see and you can kind of understand that this is an aspect of history that has not been taught and is not being shared, and it's something that should be discovered in order for us to understand our own context and our own kind of place in the world and our place amongst ourselves as brothers. So I feel like that's why it's important.
Jazakallah khair. Now I want to ask something. As me and Mustafa are both Brits, in America you have a great president, right? Okay. So, in this era of hate and divisiveness, why is Black History Month needed more so right now than ever?
I think it's needed more so now than ever because a lot of people still fail to identify that racism still exists, that colorism still exists. A lot of people prefer to believe that it doesn't happen or that there are extenuating circumstances for events to occur and that it can't just be because of someone's race. And I know myself, I've personally dealt with issues of racism. And I've even watched it occur to my kids in school. I mean, it happens, and I feel like as of right now, we have some people that are overtly racist, but there are a lot of covert racist things that occur that sometimes are overlooked and are sometimes done so inconspicuously that most people don't realize that it is racist, what is being done. For example, if I come into the masjid and I say salam to someone and they look at me and they don't respond, to me that is a racist act. And it may not be where they see it that way. I mean, there can be excuses made of, oh, well, they don't know you, but Islamically, it doesn't matter if you know me or you don't know me. You're supposed to return the greeting. And I feel like the president, our current president, he allowed people to feel comfortable in exhibiting their racism, which is good and bad, because at least I know who you are up front. But it also led a lot of people to identify within themselves what they believe or what they don't believe and where they stand in all of this. And I do hope that at some point in time, we do have more allies, or more white allies, because I feel like a change in our society, a change in American culture won't actually occur until those that are Caucasian start to actually step up and talk to other people that are Caucasian and identify, the problem. Because I feel like as long as we divert the problem to others, as long as we continue to say that it was because of some other circumstance, it was because they weren't where they were supposed to be, they were too loud, there were too many of them, as long as we continue to make excuses, we'll continue to have the same problem.
When I was a child, learning about the civil rights movement and the struggles and whatnot, and going to school in a very diverse setting, and I myself actually come from a biracial background. So my father's African American, and my mom is white, as many of you know. So I was convinced that as a kid, that, we shall overcome was right around the horizon. Like, this racism stuff, our generation is going to be the one to end it. I said, for sure. There's no way it's going to continue. My friends are all nice to each other, and, just my social background, just looking at everything. I said, there's no way that stuff is going to continue. Wow, right? Unfortunately, I was wrong, right? And even and I've shared these stories with some of you before, but many of you know that when I was a child, the Ku Klux Klan, which is a well-known racist group in the United States, actually burned a cross on my lawn when I was a child as this form of intimidation because they were upset at the fact that my mother and father were together. My mother would be, on the street, would be called a nigger lover. On the streets of Columbus. When I was 14, my house was attacked by skinheads, actually, and with bricks and rocks and things like this. And so I saw all this growing up, and even then, Obama became president. I said, okay, maybe now, maybe this is like the corner starting to turn. And then we saw the backlash. We saw, for me, one of the formative experiences for me recently was the issue in Charlottesville, and just the horrible march that happened with these people, chanting, you will not replace us, Jews will not replace us, and you've seen this in the news, right? And of course, the killing of a person. It was just a terrible thing all around. So for me, seeing this, I take a step back and I say, wow, like this thing, it can't be wished away, right? We can't just hope and pray that things are going to be better. It's going to take, as Sister Zubaydah was saying, it's going to take activism. It's going to take an active effort on all of our parts to really struggle against it and really to embrace it as our struggle. Because that's one thing that as Muslims, we are very much in tune with being against injustice wherever it is, right? And particularly when that injustice is affecting our own community. And so what we hope is that in this era, and as Ustad Kao said, it's not all doom and gloom by any means, but the current climate in the United States says that there's a lot of effort and activism that we need to be a part of. And the first step of that, you can't be active and you can't be an activist if you're not educated and aware of what you need to be active about. And so I hope that the time we spend together will allow us to have some more information that will help us turn that information, inshallah ta'ala, into action.
I can't really answer this question better than Ustaz Justin and Ustadha did because I'm not from America. My wife is American, but I'm not from America, so I didn't grow up in the same context, the same racial context or the same kind of societal context that you have. So to talk about the vitality, like the reason why it's so vital here, it would be an injustice. But I know, like, from my perspective, growing up as a Black British person in the United Kingdom, the reason why Black History Month was so important and what we're doing in Black History Month is so important is not just for the fact that people outside of the Black community are racist towards Black people, but for the fact that a lot of Muslims of African descent or Muslims of Black heritage are ignorant of their own history and contribution, and then due to that ignorance start to question their own place in Muslim society or in wider society when they're faced with these threats or with these microaggressions. So the reason why the whole Beyond Bilal project came about actually was because there was a YouTube series going on called Being a Black British Muslim, and they were interviewing prominent Black British Muslims about their experiences growing up in the Muslim community in the UK. And many people had many similar experiences to the Ustadha. They were saying things like, yeah, I would enter the mosque and I'd give salam and people would ask me, are you Muslim? Or when did you take Shahada? Or, when did you get out of prison? Or all of these kind of questions. Or like people would say, you saw people they were black and they wanted to marry somebody that wasn't black, and then Muslim families would be against the marriage because they weren't from the same race, and all of these kind of questions. And for a lot of them as well, they were converts, so they reacted to this in different ways. Some people would stray from the deen altogether. Other people would start to try and abandon their own culture and heritage and adopt Pakistani culture and heritage or Arab culture and heritage in place of their own. And many of them were ignorant of the place that they actually held within the history of Islam. And so when I was asked about this, when I was asked these same questions, I said to myself, well, for me, Islam is part of my history, and my history is also a part of Islam. So I would never feel, even though people are ignorant and they would try and make me feel unwelcome or make me feel that I'm not a part of the community, I myself know my history, and I want to share that with everybody else in order for people to know and understand the place that we have within the wider context. So I feel like, yeah, that's a major reason why I feel like it's very, very vital, especially in this day and age, just because we live in the information age. People have access to information. We have the means to know more than any other generation before us, but yet we seem to be the most ignorant and the most kind of unaware of our histories and our cultures and different manifestations of Islam across history. And so that's why I feel like this period, as a period of unveiling that, is very, very essential.
Like Mustafa, I grew up in London as well, so I can only understand the Black British experience. But for us as Muslims in London, we're faced with many difficulties and trials, going to a masjid and automatically feeling unwelcomed, because the masjid is known as a Pakistani masjid, or this is the Egyptian masjid, or this is the Syrian masjid. And for myself, I converted to Islam when I was 13. So I've had a difficult growth and difficult journey to Islam, because I was trying to find myself within the Muslim context and understanding, and couldn't really understand how myself as someone of Jamaican descent fitted into the wider Muslim narrative. And it only got worse when I was at university. I was the only probably black Muslim that was active on the committee and society. So I joined the committee to make changes. And even when we had tried to make these changes and enforce them and implement them into the community, people still had something to say Black History Month is divisive. We don't need Black History Month because Islam is not racist. And I never said Islam is racist. I said some Muslims are though. And that's the difference, that people automatically feel attacked when they hear something about racism. The same way when you speak to brothers and you speak to them about misogyny or sexism, and they'll say, no, we gave women rights. I said, bro, that's 1400 years ago. We're talking about today. We need to make changes today. And Muslims need to be at the forefront of every movement for justice, because our deen is founded upon a principle of justice, restoring justice and pride to its people. And that's why I think Black History Month is so important. So I remember I was at university once and I was doing the adhan. And I'm just saying this as a funny story because it's funny to look back on now. And I read the adhan, and the imam came up to me and he said, MashaAllah, you have such a beautiful voice. And he goes, it reminds me of Bilal. And I was thinking, yeah, I'm like Bilal, MashaAllah. And then he goes, yeah, you can tell you have suffering in your voice. Like you can hear the slavery in your voice. And this was the imam that said that. And when he said it, I was shocked. I didn't know how to react. So I thought, subhanAllah, I'm not going to try and brawl in front of the masjid. So I went behind, and it still hits me to this day. It's something that I can laugh about now, and I'm sure the brother maybe didn't mean it in a bad way, but it was something very weird to say. But those sort of experiences that probably each and every one of us have had, and that will be the next question, is the reason why I'm so passionate about talking about injustice, stuff such as racism, Yeah, and anti-blackness. So my next question to all three of you is, what personal anecdotes have kind of made you more passionate about Black History Month?
Growing up, I didn't really interact with communities or put myself in situations where I would face negative experiences, because most of my teachers were West African. I would travel to West Africa, and because I didn't, to study, etc., and because I didn't really see myself as a part of the way the community was set up in the UK, I didn't really get too involved in it. So, like, for example, my whole time in university, many people didn't even know I was Muslim or assume I was Muslim, just because of the fact that I didn't really interact, or I wasn't really active on campus. But off campus, I was like giving lectures and doing talks and touring and stuff. So it was kind of like a double life. But something that, a good anecdote, I would say it's something that happened recently on this trip that made me realize the importance of what we're doing and the importance of highlighting it. There was like a child that I met, and then the child was like, we were all about to pray, and then the child stopped and said, "Oh, are you Muslim?" Because I was the only kind of darker skinned looking person amongst the group. And then I was just like, yeah, of course I'm Muslim, that's why I'm about to pray. It didn't come across my mind, but then I just realized that in the context and the society that that child grew up in, she probably only ever associated Muslims with Arabs or Asians and didn't associate Muslims with Black people or with Islam. So that's like a personal anecdote, because for someone that's as young as that to have already internalized that, it shows the kind of mentalities and the kind of situations that are still prevalent in this day. It's not something that we can say our grandparents' generation or our parents' generation. This is the future generation coming that still need that education. And growing up, I didn't really have any. I did a lot of research, and we have people like, a few people like, for example, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Quick, who did like really good information, and Suleiman Yang, and a few people here and there. You'll get like a odd tape here and there. But there wasn't really this widespread available information ready. So I'd like to be that person that puts it out there so that people in the future can look back and say, wow, yeah, there was the Beyond Bilal tour going on, and I learned a lot through that, or there were all these different initiatives, and it can spark other people to continue to delve into this aspect of history and move the education forward and the awareness forward.
Jazakallahu khairah. Yes, for me, in terms of why it's anecdotes, like the ones I shared are probably the most powerful because they were in my formative years, right? So when you experience, violent racism firsthand, I mean, it's there's nothing you can really do to describe that and kind of what imprint that leaves on you as a human being. And today, anyone who's looking at the news or who's aware of kind of their surroundings, we know that particularly here in the United States, we still have communities where many famous examples. One of them was a young Muslim man who, when they encounter police, it often ends in violence or death. And in the same situation that if someone who were not someone of African descent or Black was in that situation, that the outcome would be different. I was actually amazed. I think it was in Florida. There was a story today about a mayor who was practicing medicine without a license. He lost his license like in 1982 or some way long time ago. And maybe he was selling some illegal prescriptions. So the SWAT team came to his house. The mayor was white, or he looks white in the picture. So the SWAT team came to his house, and they banging on the door, and they took a battering ram and started trying to batter the door down. You got the whole full SWAT team there. And so the mayor takes a gun and fires a couple of shots at them. And the news story said at that point, the SWAT team retreated behind their barrier and took cover and negotiated. And when I saw that, I said, MashaAllah, like that's great. They de-escalated, but how often will a young Black child with a toy doesn't get that same benefit of de-escalation? These were real shots fired at these people, and they knew they're dealing with the mayor, And so they retreat and they de-escalate the situation. They take him in peacefully. And so these sorts of things you have to look, and again, not everything is in a racial context, but you look at the difference between how we interact with police and things like that again. And this is 2019, right? 1440 after Hijrah. So this is reality. This is what we're dealing with in terms of what I'm seeing externally. For me personally, in terms of anecdotes, to what Brother Mustafa was saying about the children, I can say with my wife being from a Pakistani background, she told me that growing up, she had the same thought, but it was very innocent. When she thought Muslim, she thought of her family. That's all she knew, right? It's like Muslims are people that look like me. And so that was just her naive impression growing up. For me personally, my personal experiences, and when I think about it, in history, particularly among African Americans, I don't know if you have the same thing among British black folks, but we have this concept called being able to pass, right? So throughout history, there are certain black people that because of their complexion, because of their hair, they can pass as white, right? So they're able to navigate through society and they're not obviously black, and so they're able to kind of get through and navigate in such a way that someone who is of a darker complexion is not able to do, right? So I kind of joke that I can pass in the Muslim community, right? Because normally when I meet people, right, many of you have experienced this, brother, where are you from? Iskandariya, yani, min ayn ant, yani. Like they assume like I'm, Arab or Egyptian or from some other place, and so then I tell my story like, oh wow, mashallah, brother, but your Arabic is so good, and so alhamdulillah, it's all good, it's all fun. But for me, because of that, I guess just because of the black and white comes out looking kind of Arab, I guess, I don't have a lot of that overt thing going on because I have that, but I've certainly seen and witnessed a lot of what our panel members have discussed. And so, for me, it's those things, seeing what's happening externally, and to the point that was put so eloquently by my co-panelists, things that happen right inside our masjids, right, that we need to address as well.
So for me, growing up, I grew up in a predominantly black masjid. There were very few people that weren't African American that attended the masjid. It is currently one of the oldest African American, actually one of the oldest masjids in the United States. So my experience is a little bit different because I was surrounded by African American Muslims, by black scholarship, that's what I grew up and I understood as mostly being Muslim. I remember, the books that my dad had us learning Arabic out of are so old that they didn't have the stamps or the print to actually make Arabic letters. So brothers would take old tires and cut out the letters and then made their own Arabic books to teach each other Arabic. And I still have copies of some of those books to this day. So it wasn't until I actually got into college, and one of the first things I asked about was the MSA. And one of the first times I went there was for Jummah prayer, because I tried to find when they had meetings and everything else, and a couple sisters on campus that I had met, they knew nothing about the MSA, and it was pretty much dead. And so the first time I went there, the brother assumed that I was looking for the Black Student Union. And I had to tell him, no, I was looking for the MSA and I wanted to be involved. And mashallah, like some sisters and we pretty much revitalized the MSA and brought it back to campus. And it took a lot of hard work because some brothers were just very set in it just being used for Jummah prayer. And for me, Black History Month is much more important now that I have children, because this month, my children are in the 1st and 2nd grade. And so they're starting to understand a little bit more, but a lot of what they're learning in school is very standard. Like Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks. And as an educator, a lot of times that's where it ends. There's not much more education that goes on beyond that. And I find it I find it difficult that we don't teach more about Black history, especially knowing that, and I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but in schools nowadays, they have something called Patriot Day, which is September 11th. Teachers in most states are required to teach about 9/11. So they're required to teach about that. They're required to teach about the Holocaust. They're required to teach about Native American studies and the local Native American tribes that are from Ohio and different countries. Certain states are now requiring that LGBTQ is taught in schools. So the fact that all these other things are being taught to children, and the majority of the schools that I've worked at are predominantly African American students. The majority of the teaching staffs that I've interacted with are not. And so here you have situations in which children are not really learning their history. They don't really know too much. And it becomes problematic because my children and any other child needs to know exactly what happened, and that Black history extends beyond Rosa Parks. It extends beyond Martin Luther King. Like, it's so vast that a lot of what happens in Black History Month is actually up to the teacher. There's nothing mandated that Black history has to be taught. And in a lot of classrooms, in a lot of school districts, it's just not taught. And for whatever reason, it's up to the teacher's discretion. And so for me, knowing that my children have the opportunity, knowing that there are times when I have to go into other classrooms, and even though I'm not there for that purpose, I go in and I will restructure whatever I need to restructure to make sure that history is taught.
So we have 7 minutes before Isha starts. Oh, okay, 7:45. So I want to take some questions now from the audience. Is there any questions that anybody has to any of the speakers? Yes, sister. Walaikum salam. I'd just like to speak on that. It's something that has happened in England a lot and has permeated from London to the other major cities. And from just my short travels to America, I've been in different places and heard similar comments made by people, not specifically about Black History Month, but also on topics such as immigration, on topics such as crime, on topics such as sexism. So I done my dissertation looking at how Islamic theology was used by the Nation of Islam during the Civil Rights Movement. And I also looked at immigration in America in the 1910s, 20s, and 1930s. And what was a recurring theme, and I still feel is relevant today, is the othering. So people knowing that there's a disenfranchised group and distancing themselves away from that in order to be validated by a government or an organization. I've heard Muslims talk derogatory about Mexicans within this country. So I've sat in places, I've only been here for like a week, but people have said that they need to build the wall. And I'm just like, oh, so how did your grandparents get here? Or how did your parents get here? But the reason people do it is so that they feel validated and they would like to distance themselves from the current discourse. So a lot of imams, even in England, have been outspoken against Black History Month and have used the same thing, but Bilal is black. So we don't need to talk about Black history. Khadija was the first believer. So we don't need to talk about misogyny and sexism. And these are statements by people just to stop them from doing the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's really a way for them to feel better about themselves. To say, we're not them. We're not the people that you dislike. We're the good Muslims. Or we're the Muslims that are attractive to the oppressors. I'm sounding a bit like Malcolm now, but yeah, so basically that's essentially what it is. And I see a lot of people doing it a lot of times, and it's sad to see that within the Muslim community that we're not united upon the deen and of something that is blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We try and find comfort in things that are other than Islam. By being accepted, now we see many people, some sisters saying, I don't need to wear hijab because I feel comfortable just showing my hair because I want to be like everybody else. We see brothers ashamed to wear maybe a thobe or grow a beard because they want to fit in to certain places. And this is happening to our deen because we no longer find pride and joy within what Rasulullah has taught us.
I was going to ask, you said it was an imam that made that statement. Was he black? He wasn't. Yeah, and I feel like that's a major problem. So I remember when the Black Lives Matter movement was going on and all of the riots and everything were happening, there was a famous sheikh on Twitter. He graduated from like a Saudi university, and he's very well known in the Dawah scene, and he always does question and answer sessions. And someone asked him on Twitter about the Black Lives Matter movement and said, oh, you know, as Muslims, what should we do about Black Lives Matter, or should we support it? And he said, no, that's for them. We should focus on Muslim issues. And so it shows that it's a mentality that's ingrained in a lot of people. I mean, I don't know how the immigrant community is set up here, but it's like with Islam here in America started with black Muslims from slavery, from the days of slavery. Just recently, I think there was like the only kind of slave diary or document was saved. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know the full information, but it was a West African slave who wrote his journal in Arabic, and it was preserved, and now it's in one of the national museums in America, and that's like one of the slave journals and the only Arabic document. And these people, they had communities, they were establishing masjids, they were still learning and speaking and reading and writing Arabic from the Islamic scholarly tradition that they had in West Africa. And as Kyle, I read his dissertation, and it was interesting to note that the reason why a lot of Muslim immigrants from Indo-Pakistani backgrounds or Arab backgrounds were even allowed into the country were because of the results that happened from black Muslims campaigning during the civil rights movement and their effective campaigning, changing immigration laws, allowing people to come in. So when you want to talk about Islam in America, you have to talk about black Muslims and their struggle and their contribution to society. But a lot of people come into the society, and because they saw the position that black Muslims were in, or black people were in generally, as Kyle said, they tried to distance themselves from it. And that's still a rhetoric that's repeated today. You can see people that would rather, be close to their white non-Muslim counterparts and be accepted in wider American society and distance themselves from the black community and the struggles or campaigning for equality, even though they might pray next to that person in the same masjid, which is very, very sad. And so initiatives like this, I feel, are very, very essential to educate people and remind people that our presence here as Muslims in the USA is due to the struggles and the fighting that black people had to go through in order to establish civil rights for everybody. And so that person, that imam that made that statement that Black History Month isn't relevant is somebody that's the most in need of Black History Month.
I don't have much to add other than I've had a couple experiences when I've met people with the title imam who ended up having racist attitudes. And I literally, one time I had to walk away and I took a step back and I felt like my worlds were colliding, right? Because one of the things that brought me into Islam was the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us such beautiful guidance regarding race relations. And as the brothers mentioned earlier about the ayah, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. Right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling out to all humanity, to all people, that we have created you, male and female, nations and tribes, so that you could get to know one another intimately, right? So not for men and women to hate each other, not for different nations, different tribes to hate each other, but to know each other intimately, to appreciate each other, right? So it's just very interesting how in some cases the traditional Islamic education and reading the tafsir of an ayah, it's not the same as living the ayah, right? Sometimes you have to live the ayah. And we're blessed in this masjid, alhamdulillah, that ayah I just mentioned, we can live it. We have the opportunity to live it. We can put into practice lita'arafu, to know one another, to appreciate one another intimately. Not, as Ustad Kal said, not every masjid has that. Some masjid you go and everyone, alhamdulillah, it's a masjid, but everyone who frequents that masjid happens to be from a certain background and nationality. But it's something you have to be intentional about. And I want you, next time that you walk into a room and you see people socializing, even here, focus and see that, watch how groups tend to congregate, right? You'll notice that people tend to go, maybe the converts with the converts, and the Arabs with the Arabs, Afghani with Afghani, and Pakistani, and West African. And not all the time, but just be aware of that. And if you're one of those people who's never taken the opportunity, even though Allah's given it to you on a silver platter, if you haven't taken the opportunity to go a little bit outside your comfort zone, say, you know what, I've seen that brother from Pakistan for 10 years. I've never really got to know who he is and how his family's doing. That convert sister, that African-American sister, I see her all the time. I don't know her name. I don't know what her struggle is. Let me talk to her. Make the effort. Again, don't just read about the ayah. Don't just be theoretical. Let's start to live the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So I did see that video. I thought it was really unfortunate. I felt like the imam was not intentional. I just felt like he was ignorant. And he just didn't know. I feel like often when it comes to African Americans and Black Muslims and just being Black in general, the assumption is that all African Americans are converts, or that we've all come through the Nation of Islam, and that is most certainly not the case. In America, the oldest masjid was actually founded by Black Muslims, and that was in, I think, 1922. So you're talking about multiple generations of born African American Muslims. I've witnessed where Muslims feel like we have to fit into the larger, majority of America, and we have to assimilate. And I feel like when we choose to do that, we lose the ability to get to know one another. We lose the ability to identify with each other because we're so busy trying to fit in with a group of people that already consider us outsiders. And it really doesn't matter, in my opinion, what country you're from, what your nationality is. The one thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us all was Islam. And it's through Islam that we all need to learn and, like the brother said, get to know each other and step out of your comfort zone. And that doesn't mean you have to assimilate to another culture. That doesn't mean you have to adopt another culture. That just means you have to be willing to see someone else. And sometimes that's all it takes, to just see someone else, speak to someone else, learn about their culture, learn about their history, their heritage. And to know that like there are amazing brothers and sisters in so many walks of life. And it's really limiting, it's really unfortunate if you choose to stay within your own cultural group, your own ethnicity, because you're missing out on so many experiences, you're missing out on so many different aspects of knowledge. And I really do hope that someone will reach out to that imam. Hopefully someone within that community would be willing to reach out to him and speak with him and just like have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and talk to him. And I'm hoping and I pray that through this dialogue, through this weekend, that the same thing will happen here. Because at times we can be very divisive. And this community, it's so vast, it's so large, and it's very easy to segregate yourself. It really is. It's very easy to have certain masjids where this particular group goes and this other particular group goes. It's very easy to have halakas where only this particular ethnicity goes, and it's not necessary. And we just really need to get to know each other.
Yeah, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I think the sister wants to respond. Thank you. Round of applause. Sister, do you want to respond?
Respectfully, I just wanted to dissect what you actually said to the reason why this even came about and why this is actually needed. So you were saying we should speak about Islamic history rather than black history. So I would ask for you, what is the difference between black history and Islamic history? Yeah.
Brother, we have an extensive history in Islam, a period called the Golden Age, Andalusia. We've never ever heard one person say, why are we only speaking about Andalusia in Spain? The issue is that when it's spoken about black history, it brings about people's innate prejudice inside them that they feel like, oh, black people are now getting a platform. And you start to feel excluded from the conversation because in wider Muslim communities, when people speak about Muslims, you feel included as someone from the Indo-Pak subcontinent. But many people sitting here feel excluded from that conversation because they're not represented in the media, they're not represented in books, they're not represented in history. For many people, we can't speak about Islamic history because people want to maybe just talk about one or two issues. But most people do not know about the extensive history that exists within black Africa or contributed by black Muslims. So the reason why the Beyond Bilal is important, black history is your history. Each and every one of you. Whether you come from Pakistan, whether you come from Syria, whether you come from Egypt, whether you come from the UK or the US, the contribution black Muslims have made is the reason why we are all gathered in this masjid today. And I can proudly say that. So looking across, I can see people from a whole host of nations. And Alhamdulillah, it's because we are a brotherhood. But do we act like brothers once we leave the masjid? People are shaking their head. Do we act like brothers when we see cops killing young armed black people? Or do we attribute that to them being a gangster or a thug? So these are the questions that we are actually raising. Is that the wider Muslim community, maybe not in all cases, but in some cases, exclude black people from the wider Muslim narrative. That's why it's important.
All right, brothers and sisters, we're going to wrap for tonight. However, as you can see, there's a lot of interesting conversation to be had, and appreciate the brothers' comment and all of your comments. It's going to be a tough conversation at times, but it's a conversation we need to have. So I invite all of you. You can see the schedule at the Masjid Noor's website on our Facebook page. Please come back tomorrow to continue the conversation. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله